alignment for private financial institutions, commitments, and methodologies. This research showed that although sustainable finance commitments and initiatives have been increasing, their operationalization remains challenging. It is essential that they still pose real ambition to financial institutions to avoid greenwashing and to enable a good tracking of financial flows. At FC4S, we believe it is essential to promote spaces like this, where the significance of accomplishing the Paris Agreement goals is the focus, and where we can support collective commitment for climate action. In this session, you will learn about the PACTA Tool, now under the stewardship of the Rocky Mountain Institute, and with the backing of the UNPRI. PACTA enables users to measure the alignment of financial portfolios with climate scenarios and to analyze specific companies. The presentation by PACTA colleagues here will cover both PACTA Tool for banks, which allows users to get a very detailed alignment, a detailed view, of the alignment of corporate loan portfolios by sector and related technologies, both at the corporate, client, and portfolio level. Banks currently use this information to help them target their lending, as well as inform their decisions, and to inform and plan their strategic engagement with clients. Whereas PACTA Tool for investors, which is also going to be covered today, helps them implement the recommendations of the TCFD, for example, and other regulations on the scenario alignment of their sector portfolio, and as well to identify potential transition risks within their investments. Investors can also use this information to inform their engagement with companies. Overall, PACTA has been used by over 1,500 financial institutions worldwide, as well as by supervisors and central banks to assess their regulated entities. For example, the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, California Department of Insurance, or Bank of England, among others. On average, monthly, more than 600 portfolios are tested using the PACTA Tool. So without further ado, I will introduce you to our speakers today. We have Naira Herrera, who is lead of the PACTA for Investors product at the Rocky Mountain Institute, and she works leading research aiming to help apply investors' portfolios in accordance with the nature of the financial products. As part of her role, she also works on implementing projects to measure the alignment of investment portfolios to climate change scenarios in different regions. She has a background in capital markets, having served in the Colombian financial sectors at the self-regulatory organization and at the Colombian Stock Exchange. And Mr. Nicolas Dodd, who will start the presentation today, he's a senior associate in the PACTA team at the Rocky Mountain Institute, previously at the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. Since March 2021, he has worked in both the public and private sector on energy transition and sustainable finance policy and practice, including the European Commission Director General Joint Research Center on the EU taxonomy, the EU eco-label, and labels. He is an environmental scientist with a degree from University of Manchester and Salford. So a quick admin caveat, the session will be followed by a Q&A, the presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. So you can introduce yourself in the chat box and please drop your questions there, or raise your hand and request the microphone. We want you to participate, so thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're going to both present. I'm going to start. Let me just share the screen. Okay, is that showing okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to start with the first half of the presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. And we're going to, as mentioned, we're going to focus on the use of PACTA, the Paris Agreement Capital Transition Assessment, which is used to measure the portfolio alignment to climate scenarios. So we're going to give you a general overview of that this morning or this afternoon as well. Okay, and just briefly, and we'll give you an introduction both to RMI and PACTA, its unique features, the overall approach, the metrics that it uses, and the different versions mentioned, both for banks and investors, which we'll give you a brief overview of as well. So I think we actually took part in a similar seminar about a year ago, when both Naira and I would have been part of the team, of PACTA team at the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. In the meantime, the need was identified to really sort of scale up the potential of PACTA to be used by the financial sector, and the decision was made to actually transfer the stewardship of PACTA as a methodology, as a tool, as an approach to the Rocky Mountain Institute, in order to really sort of scale up and really build on the potential of PACTA internationally for use by financial institutions. So we're now presenting, the PACTA team is now part of RMI. RMI is a non-profit organization that has over 40 years of pioneering the path to clean energy. It's very much been focused on the energy transition since the early 80s. It has a wide range of experience in developing sort of solutions and approaches to clean energy and energy transition with a global perspective, which very much fitted with the objectives of sort of really scaling up PACTA as a tool for the financial sector. So PACTA team very much now part of RMI under its climate finance program. In terms of a general introduction to what PACTA is, it is an approach to measuring the alignment of portfolios and also investee companies and counterparties to climate goals using different scenarios. It is a free-to-use tool without the need for any formal commitment for use by both banks and investors. But as you'll see, we also use it at a sort of meta scale with governments and supervisors as well. And the outputs of the approach, the methodology it used, can be used to inform a range of different use cases within financial institutions, including looking at, and some of this is tied in with recommendation from, for example, the TCFD, understanding the exposure to transition risk in a portfolio, for example, informing investment strategy and decision making within a financial institution, steering capital allocation decisions, communicating on climate positioning to external stakeholders through reporting and disclosure. Obviously, those requirements and expectations, both from regulators and from stakeholders, are increasing over time, and in some cases now are requirements. And also, very importantly, and underpinning all of this, is tracking the actual impact of decisions in the real economy in terms of real actual CO2 emissions. I mean, I briefly touched upon this already, but I mean, PACTA was very much a concept that was introduced and developed around the time of the Paris Agreement in 2015, Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which sets the scene for the use of PACTA as a scenario analysis tool to achieve climate goals in line with the Paris Agreement, of achieving a sort of below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degree world. It was introduced and developed by 2 Degrees Investing Initiative, and over time, from 2018, was introduced as a tool for investors, firstly, looking on equity and corporate bonds, was then developed further for use by banks, recognizing the importance of finance as well in terms of capital flows. And then we launched in an interactive report online for investors and a standalone software package and data package for banks in 2020 and 2021. And then, as I mentioned, this year, the stewardship of PACTA as a methodology, as a tool for further scaling up has been transferred to the Rocky Mountain Institute. What's unique about PACTA? Well, it is, as I mentioned, both a methodology and an application tool. So the methodology is continuously being developed by ourselves. It has a number of different components to it, which we'll explain in a moment. And then we have a number of different forms in which it is then applied and can be used by financial institutions. The unique features, though, of PACTA compared to other approaches is it is very much based on production and capacity-based climate indicators based in the real economy. So these indicators are linked to real capital commitments of companies and decision-making. We use forward-looking data, which gives 5-year production plans and forecasts for companies. So you have a forward-looking view on the results and alignment. We choose the metrics to be decision useful within a financial institution in terms of capital allocation decisions. And importantly, in terms of minimizing the barriers to its use, it is free to use and there's no formal commitment required. Now, I'm just going to outline in a bit more detail the general approach. It very much involves linking together 3 main areas, 3 main aspects, and also information. The first is we look at the capital flows of a bank or an investor in terms of data about their portfolio and its allocation to different assets. The climate goals are defined by the use of specific choosing different scenarios and their sectoral decarbonisation pathways. In fact, it very much works sector by sector. And then climate indicators are developed for different sort of climate critical sectors that PACTA focuses on, which are these. Well, there's 7. We don't currently, we're still looking on shipping, but there's 7 main sectors which are critical in terms of their importance to overall global CO2 emissions. And here we develop indicators that basically give you information as to the underlying performance of a company and its assets in these different sectors. And so the first element of PACTA is to actually look at the capital flows, the capital allocations of a financial institution, whether that be an investor or a bank. That may be equity holdings, it may be corporate debt in the form of bonds or the loans, a loan book. And what are the value of those different holdings for each different counterparty or investee company. And then we look through to each company using asset level data to the actual physical assets, the power stations, the car manufacturing plant, the aeroplanes that are operated by each of those companies. Then in terms of climate goals, we use a number of scenarios or make available a number of scenarios to use as a PACTA. These scenarios are modeled based on the overall carbon budget and climate goal established for a scenario. And that carbon budget is very much adjusted to achieve a certain climate goal by 2050 usually. And so the modeling of each scenario in terms of the socioeconomics, socioeconomic modeling, climate modeling, and for each sector in terms of different technologies that may be used, and the pathway that would have to be followed in terms of using different technology transitions are modeled to achieve and maintain a certain carbon budget and to achieve a certain temperature goal. And that then gives us, that modeling gives us, basically tells us what needs to happen in different climate critical sectors in order to meet a certain climate goal. In order to follow a particular sectoral decarbonisation pathway. So you read those pathways, and you'll see that we use a number of different scenarios, which have different goals, different temperature goals. Provided by the IEA, for example, the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, ISF, which is used by the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and IPR, which is inevitable policy response scenarios developed by UNPRI. Each one of these has very different climate goals, different assumptions, both at a scenario level and for different sectors in terms of the different technology transitions that may need to take place, which you can then measure alignment of different companies and their technologies against. And I mentioned these are the climate critical sectors. Together, they're responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions. So we very much focus on enabling financial institutions to measure alignment of holdings in these sectors based on the performance of the underlying assets of companies that are active in these sectors. And for that, we use asset-backed company data provided by Asset Resolution, which is a specialist data provider, and the data on the individual power stations, steel production plant, the aircraft operated by a passenger airline, for example, are rolled up to company level and then can be aggregated into portfolio level to look on that to get an alignment result. And this is very, very granular. We're always striving to improve the coverage of companies and assets at a global level. And you'll see here just some indications of the sheer number of individual assets and companies that are covered for some of the different sectors. And basically, PACTA is about bringing together those three elements I've described. So the kind of physical assets of companies in which financial institution has holdings, the scenarios which provide us with a decarbonisation pathway for each sector, and therefore the kind of level of build out or technology transition that needs to be achieved on our 5-year forward-looking time frame. And we compare the two. So how are the companies in the portfolio performing compared to how the decarbonisation pathway for their sector says that they should be performing on that 5-year forward-looking time frame. And to do that, we use 3 different metrics. The metrics we use depend on the sector. One of them is a technology, and my colleague Naira is going to introduce these in a little bit more detail in a moment. But essentially, we distinguish between companies that have a clear technology pathway or technology roadmap, in which we use the technology mix and the volume trajectory metrics, so we can actually measure based on production capacity of the company and the different technologies that they have. And then for those sectors where we have a less the scenario is less clear on the technology transitions, for example, the steel sector, we use emission intensity, which is CO2 emissions normalized to production. So these are the 3 main metrics we use to measure alignment with. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Naira, who's going to go into a little bit more detail with the metrics.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, so I'm going to present a little bit more about the metrics that Nick previously mentioned. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to start explaining to you the technology mixture. So this is a visual representation on how the exposure is spread among the different types of technologies in each sector. It allows the user to identify the distribution among all the technologies inside the sector and how this is compared to a sustainable development scenario or also to the market benchmark. The market benchmark will be different if we are using PACTA for banks or PACTA for investors. I will explain that in one moment. But for example, in the chart you are seeing in the screen, is an example for the power sector. In the first bar, that is called Portfolio 2021, we are seeing the current exposure of my portfolio in this sector. So we can see that, for example, in here, there's a big exposure to gas power and oil power. And we can compare with the second bar to understand how the plans that companies that make up the portfolio are going to change in the next 5 years. So we can see that we will have some increase in renewables, and it will be a diminution in oil power generation. Something also relevant to bear in mind here is that the differences between these two columns are driven by changes that the companies that compose the portfolio are making in the ways of producing. Because one of the main assumptions of PACTA is that the portfolio is static. So we are not considering divestments or changing the allocation of the portfolio for the analysis. If we go to column 3, we can see how my portfolio needs to change to be aligned with the sustainable development scenario 5 years forward looking. So of course, it means that to be aligned, I need to increase more my exposure to either power and reduce much more the exposure to gas power. The fourth line shows how the benchmark behaves or performs today. So in this case, this benchmark has a higher exposure to brown technology, so coal power, gas power, and oil power. And the next column, the fifth one, is how the benchmark will be in 5 years, also taking into account that the benchmark will be static, so analyzing the same company. There are many things that we can analyze here. So as I said, if we compare column 1 with column 2, we can understand how the plans of the companies are going to change in the upcoming years. But also if we compare 1 and 3, we can see where the portfolio has big gaps because those are technologies where there are technologies where the companies should focus more. And also, let's go to the next time. I will explain the benchmark when we get to the differences of both products. This is the volume trajectory chart. This is available for technologies with defined technological pathways. So for example, if we analyze the power industry, we know that we have to transition from oil generated energy to renewables or hydro energy. In this case, in the screen, we are seeing a coal mining production example. So the colored zones represent the volume ranges that are compatible with different climate scenarios. So the green zone will be aligned with an SDS scenario. The light yellow zone will be aligned with the SPS scenario. The yellow, a little bit darker zone will be aligned with the CPS scenario. And the red zone is not aligned with any scenario. Therefore, it's targeting an increase of the temperature rise higher than 3 degrees Celsius. There are the dotted line that you can see in the screen represents the benchmark. So in the case for banks, we use the corporate economy. So it's all the companies that are in this sector in our database. And in the investor side, it represents the benchmark that we choose in the interactive report. We have different benchmarks available. So basically global indexes. I will mention them later as well. The continuous line represents the portfolio. So both of the lines represent the amount of coal production allocated to each one of the portfolios based on their holdings and taking into consideration the planned production of the investee companies. So in this case, we can see that the line or my portfolio is planning to increase coal mining by more than 10%. But if I want to be aligned with the SDS scenario, I need to decrease coal mining by around 20%. So this is kind of the analysis that we can see with this chart. In the next slide, I will explain also briefly to you the emission intensity metric. So this metric is used for technologies where there's no technological pathways defined, such as steel, cement, or aviation. In this metric, we set the targets using the SBTI sectoral decarbonization approach. So in each scenario, they define carbon budgets for each sector, and this is converted to emission intensity targets, taking into consideration all the companies that we have in our data set. These targets are in the chart that you're seeing on screen, reflected in the yellow line. Then, to analyze the portfolio, we calculate the weighted average emission intensity of the portfolio, and then we define the targets for it. The target of the portfolio in this case is the red line that you're seeing on the screen. And the blue and green lines in the chart represent the projected emission intensities for the corporate economy, so all the companies that we have in our data set, and for the portfolios, that is the red line, the dark green line. Since this is a convergence approach, all portfolio targets will equal the benchmark target, so the scenario target, at the point of the scenario. The starting point depends on how the companies that make up the portfolio are performing today. In the next slide, I will present to you the TDM, as we call it, of the transition disruption metric. This is a metric that was released almost 1 year ago, and it is complementary to the PACTA alignment model, since it provides a score of the medium-term potential disruption of the portfolio under the forecast policy scenario developed by IPR. If the score of this metric is higher the disruption will be in the portfolio. So this metric creates a quantitative score of the potential disruption by 2030 based on how far the portfolio lags or leads the FPS scenario in the first 5 years. This indicator is available at a technology level and at a portfolio level. And in other words, it measures how much you have left to do relative to how much time you have left. So we can say that is a progress indicator tracking disruption. Another way or an analogy that we can use to explain how this metric works can be using an example of the day-to-day life. So if we have a plan to run 10 kilometers in 1 hour, when we want to track the progress or the disruption we will have in the race, if we run the 10 kilometers in 30 minutes, the score of the disruption metric will be 0 because we completed the work before the hour. If we run half of the distance in 30 minutes, the disruption score will be 1. So we are on track to finish the run, but we haven't reached the objective yet. And most importantly, it means that the efforts should be the same in the remaining time to meet the goal. If we run only 2.5 kilometers out of the 10 in 30 minutes, the disruption will be 1.5. So we are significantly behind to finish the race at the current pace. So if we want to get to the goal, we'll need to accelerate and run much faster. And every score above 1.5 means that it will have the portfolio will have a significant disruption, because less than the quarter of the work that has to be done will be done in the first 5 years. And that's how we see the analogy of how this TDM metric works. In the next slide, I'm going to present the different versions that we have of PACTA. All of them follow the same principles of the same methodology assumptions. In the next slide, we can see that we have 2 tools. So we have PACTA for banks and PACTA for investors, but we also have one work that we do implementing projects, coordinated projects with different governments or supervisors. So PACTA for banks, as Nick mentioned, was launched in 2018 and was road tested by 18 major banks. We have worked with more than 100 banks, and the tool is available online. This tool is run in-house, So the users download the material that is available on the Transition Monitor website and run it themselves. We have also PACTA for Investors, which has been used for by more than 3,000 financial institutions. And for this tool, we have an interactive report online. So if an investor wants to run the portfolio, they can just go sign up and generate the results in less than 30 minutes. We provide some company level results for some of the sectors. So in this case, it's automotive and power. And we analyze corporate bonds, listed equity, and funds that have corporate bonds and listed equity in them. And then we have the PACTA coordinated projects, where we work, as I mentioned before, with governments or supervisors or trading associations to apply PACTA at a country level or at a sector level. So for example, pension funds, insurance companies, and we run the analysis with the whole group. In this case, we generate a meta report, so we analyze the whole industry, but we also provide individual report to the users. This project have support from RMI, and we analyze, we can use PACTA for Investors or PACTA for banks, or mix the two tools if it is at a country level, and analyze corporate bond, listed equity funds, and corporate loans. In the next slide, I'm going to present a little bit more about PACTA for Investors. So as I mentioned, we cover listed equity, corporate bonds, and funds, and all the information required to apply the methodology is already embedded in the tool. So we have already the financial data of the companies that we want to analyze there, and also scenario data and physical asset level data. And we require the user to upload a CSV file with 5 columns, which are the ones that you're seeing on the right side of the screen. So we require the name of the investor, that will be the name of the company, the portfolio name, because they can upload as many portfolios as they want, the ISIN, that will be the information we will get to connect the companies in our datasets, the market value of the investment. Normally, we provide information, the financial information for the 31st of December of each year. So if you're using the tool for the 31st of December 2021, we will require you to upload the market value with the same date, and then the currency in which the investment was made. In the next slide, this is the Transition Monitor platform. So we will share with you the slides later, and if you go to the Transition Monitor platform in red, you will have the link there to connect and check visit the platform. In this platform, users sign up, upload their portfolios, and generate results in less than 30 minutes. In the platform, there's also detailed information on how to do the different steps to generate results. And we have also available a mock portfolio in case you want to test it before uploading your own data. There's also an option to aggregate results. So I can upload 20 portfolios, but then if I want to see what the results will be for 5 of them together, I can just select them and generate one aggregated PACTA result for that portfolio that I just created. In the next slide, I present some of the different company level results that we provide online. So we have on the right side the company technology exposure. So this reflects the company's exposure to different technologies within the sector. And this information is compared in the same chart to the portfolio's exposure to those technologies and to what the scenario will ask me to do if I want to be aligned. So this is very relevant information for the investors, since they can also see which companies are driving the results for the power and automotive sector. in the left side of your screen, you can see the bubble chart, as we call it internally, is the company low carbon split. And the bubble size in this chart represents the size of the investment in my portfolio in this sector. And the x-axis, I have the share of the investments in low carbon technologies as of today. And in the y-axis, we have the future build out according to the scenario requirements. So this is also a relevant metric where we can start identifying companies that we want to engage with to start having some impact in the real economy. In the next slide, we have PACTA for banks. So this is the second tool that we have available, and we analyze corporate loans. The input that we need from the user, and this is the basic input, like normally we give to the banks information on how they should build the file that they will run to generate the PACTA results. They have more than three columns, but this is like the minimum information they need to include to generate the results. So it's the company name. So who is the company I'm doing the lending the money? The second is the loan size. And here we can use the credit limit or the debt outstanding. And the third one is the sector classification. In the next slide, these are some of the principles that we have in the PACTA for Banks toolkit. So all the links to download the software are available in the Transition Monitor platform. Also the scenario data, which is already transformed to be implemented in PACTA, is available in the Transition Monitor website. And company production forecast is provided by Asset Resolution. So in our website, you can see a tab where you can request this information after signing the terms and conditions from Asset Resolution. And you can also find some training materials, so some documents and some videos on how to run PACTA. In the next slide, so we have all codes, as I mentioned before, available in the Transition Monitor website. We have loan book data, which is prepared by the banks. We provide detailed instructions on how to prepare the data. It is very easy, and we require very basic information like the sector classification code, loan size, and company to which the banks are providing financing. Then we receive asset-based company level data, which is provided by Asset Resolution. So we have the name of the company, as you can see it here in the second column, and we have the current and forecast production in the different technologies available for each sector. Then we have the second code, that is match R2DII. This code allow banks to connect the companies that they have in their internal data sets with the companies that are provided in the Asset Resolution data set. We also provide the data that we receive from scenario providers like the International Energy Agency, JRC, ISF, and the second code that is available online is the code for analysis that is called R2DII analysis. All these codes are built in R, and these codes allow us to perform the PACTA analysis. Then we have a third code that is the R2DII plot, which will allow us to generate the charts for the different sectors and for the different and generate the different metrics that I explained before. Something relevant to note here, and it's a difference between PACTA for investors and PACTA for banks, is that in the bank side, the banks receive detailed information about production from Asset Resolution, so they can generate also these plots that you see in the right side by company on the data for investors, on the PACTA for investors tool, all this information is provided at a portfolio level and it's available online. In the next slide, I will mention very quickly some of the projects we run with governments and with supervisors. So with governments, how it works is the government invites financial institutions to participate in the PACTA exercise. They provide directly to us information about their portfolios by the platform. So we don't receive direct information, but they do it through the platform. We share with them individual results. So it's the PACTA results, but we have additional metrics so they can compare the results with their peers. And we also generate a meta report where we analyze how the industry is performing in the climate terms. And then we also work with supervisors where we don't involve financial institutions, but it's the supervisor who provide us the data. Sometimes we run it, sometimes they prefer to run it themselves. So of course, RMI provides individual support for them to run the portfolio and be sure that the information or the outcomes of the analysis make sense. And we also generate a meta report with them. This meta report can be done on our site. Sometimes it's the supervisor who wants to do the meta report, or we do a collaboration to do this type of job. So some examples of supervisory government and partnership that we have run are the ones that you're seeing on the screen. So we have Switzerland, Liechtenstein, well, in the next slide. So in this screen, you are seeing the email where you can contact us if you have specific questions about PACTA for banks or PACTA for investors. You have also the link to the website where you can find all the methodology documentation and links to all our trainings and documents that are available online. And we are happy right now to answer your questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Naira and Nicolas. This was indeed a very clear presentation. I think that's why there are no questions yet. I am really shocked about like the quantity of information and like practical information for financial institutions to engage directly with PACTA Tool. So thank you very much. It was brilliant. Maybe I would like to kickstart the discussion asking about the data provider that you use. I think that you didn't use one last year, so I would like to know if there are like any, which are like the key benefits that you have, let's say, discovered in using a data provider, and if there are any, let's say, challenges or still remaining data gaps that are still, let's say, barriers for you.
Sure. So we have different data providers. If we talk about financial data, we are using right now FactSet. And if we are talking about asset-based company level data, we have our data provider, which is Asset Resolution. They have changed some of the sources of their information in order to provide to us also more granular data for each one of the sectors. And regarding the challenges that we have in terms of data, it's something that I think Asset Resolution keep working on, and on our side as well, is to complement information on emerging markets. So we have already improved. Like the first time we run a project in emerging markets, the coverage was not very good. And each time that we run a project in, I don't know, Colombia, Peru, Malaysia, we try to complement the data we have. But of course, it's still like a challenge to have a high coverage as we have in developed markets. I don't know, Nick, if you want to add something up to this point.
Yeah, maybe I can just add in relation to the data of for the different sectors. I mean, to take the example of the steel sector, we worked with asset resolution last year, recognizing that at the time that the coverage was relatively low, and that coverage was low, particularly in emerging markets and the associated regions. So the idea was to then go out to the market again, look at the different data providers in order to increase that coverage, which has now raised from something like 40% up to 70 or 80%. And that increase in coverage has been particularly in emerging markets. So we're continuously sort of working with asset resolution to try and get a very good granular coverage, but still there are areas and regions where that's more difficult. And as Naira says, there we would look to sort of see if we can somehow complement the data we have with more regional or local data if we see those gaps when we're working with partners in a particular region internationally.
Thank you. Thanks a million. And I see there's a question from Josh there. It reads, are there any current limitations with the climate scenarios PACTA uses? What would you hope to see developed regarding climate scenarios that would improve PACTA?
Yeah, so I will...
Go on, you go first now, and then we can...
Great, thank you. So I think that we provide a tool which integrate different scenarios, and we of course analyze each one of the assumptions of the scenarios that we will integrate, and integrate the ones that we think make more sense for the financial institutions to use. I would say that I don't see limitations in terms of the scenarios. And regarding regarding the development of new scenarios that would improve PACTA, I think that if we had access to more region-based scenarios, will be beneficial for some of the regions where we implement this project. But I leave Nick complement on this point.
Sorry, if I may just add a highlight. I think this is really important for financial institutions and corporates who are currently very, let's say, concerned about how to drive the decarbonization transition and the low carbon transition. So maybe that's why the question is very relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just to complement, I mean, yeah, the regionality perspective is becoming increasingly important. And if we take technologies such as coal power, where there's discussion about managed phase out, clearly the timing of that will be different in different regions. So for example, in Europe, North America, the timing in the scenarios is by 2030, but in other regions it may be by 2040, and that will give you different results. And in terms of engaging with companies, in terms of financial institutions engaging with companies, the discussions are different, the timeframes are different. So that granularity does become important, particularly in working in emerging markets where the objectives are different. The other thing just to mention with some of the scenarios is they're not always developed thinking in terms of the use by an alignment measurement methodology. So sometimes the sort of granularity of the data or the data points we get from the scenario developers, we have to kind of work with it or add some additional assumptions. So we're continuously trying to improve the dialogue with the scenario developers, who are starting to realize that so, you know, it's being used for this purpose. You know, it's not one of their intended purposes originally. So discussing with IEA, JRC, etc. So, yeah.
Sure. And in that sense, thank you, Nicolas and Naira. There's a question by Samira from BankTrack about why the carbon budget is calculated for the 2050 only. Would it not be more effective to adopt interim carbon budgets, for example, 2030? In that sense, I don't know, maybe you have something to add.
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, the budget for, I think if you, for example, look at the modeling by IEA or Joint Research Centre, to my understanding, it's done year on year. because each year, the start year of the carbon budgeting is very important to achieve the climate goal. So if it even if it starts in 2018 or 2020, the difference in the budgeting is quite substantial, and the potential climate goal outcome is different. So the scenario developers model that year on year, and so it's to achieve an objective by 2050, or in fact year 2100, but the implications along the pathway are modeled, and the implications for the first 5 years or the first 10 years are very much taken into account, because that first 5 or 10 years are really critical in achieving the climate goal. So that there is attention focused on that by the scenario developers in terms of the sort of targets, the production, the amount of production change that occurs in those first years.
Thanks. Thank you very much. That was really clear, Nicholas. We have another question from Anna Creed from Climate Bonds. It reads, what sort of data does asset resolution provide? GHG projections for the companies being invested in, or more production volumes, on technology mixes, and emission values? And what is the basis of that data? Public statements from the companies themselves? Or do you know, I may add here, do you know if they use like spatial finance, let's say, like digital technologies to analyze asset level data?
Yeah, I mean, the underlying data is, to my understanding, put together using a range of different sources that then enables asset resolution to, well, okay, so they use a number of different data providers for different sectors, and each provider generally uses a range of different sources to understand what the kind of announced plans of the company are looking forward for 5 years. That could include from financial statements, announcements in the public domain, and they're kind of categorized in terms of the level of certainty of that announcement. If they're saying that there's a sort of commitment of investment to a change in production in 5 years' time, the level of commitment is kind of put into different categories depending if it's just a public statement or it's a kind of firm commitment in terms of financial, investment decisions. So this is what happens. Obviously, each data provider uses a slightly different methodology. And then another element is that it's actually, these forward plans are back tested generally. So, some companies have a better track record of others of making accurate announcements of their forward production plans. Others are less, usually are less accurate. So there's an adjustment based on the sort of past performance, past achievement of production forecasts by companies, whether they were better or worse, so actually achieving what they state in the public domain.
Thank you, Nicholas. I hope that has cleared Anna's question. I still have 1 more minute, but I would like to ask if you have plans to expand to different asset classes, for example, sovereign bonds or private equity, and let's say any future plans, let's say in that direction.
Yes, so definitely we want to start exploring new financial assets like private equity and sovereign bonds. It is still something that is in the early stage of development, because of course it will require new data that we don't currently have, and analyze different approaches that we can take to get results for those new asset classes. But definitely something that is in the pipeline, as well as including new sectors.
Thanks a million, Naira. We will stay tuned for updates on that regard. And well, given the time, I'd like to thank these 2 brilliant panelists we had today, and thank the audience for joining. I hope you have found this session very interesting and that you share this information with your colleagues. I invite you to visit our webpage, www.activeforest.org, and stay tuned. Yes. And Naira, you can jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to invite also like financial institutions that are present in this webinar to contact us and bring us feedback. Like right now, we are, as I mentioned before, thinking about expanding the work we are doing. So for us, it's very relevant to have feedback from financial institutions. So all our emails are in the slides. Please don't hesitate to contact us.
That's great. Yes, we will follow up by email. I'll send the material, and this presentation will be online so that you can review it as necessary. Thank you once again, Naira and Nicholas, and thank everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.